Hello and welcome to the program. My name is Alexander Kiri. The Ukrainian parliament is gearing up to pass the 2018 budget. It's bound to be a drawn-out affair, with MPs mulling over the priorities in next year's budget. Some of the key sectors include defense, education, infrastructure and reform efforts. Joining us in the studio to discuss these issues is Dmytro Boyarchyk, the Executive Director of KISS Ukraine. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, thank you for inviting.
Just for people to understand, the budget seems usually quite technical, but it's a key, it's a center theme for Ukraine and for next year. Will this? What are the priorities of this year's budget?
I would say that key features of this budget, firstly, that targeted deficit is substantially less than it was in previous year. For this year, the deficit target is 3% of GDP. For next year, the target is 2.5% of GDP, so we are gradually narrowing our fiscal gap. Another important priority is that there will be increased financing for, in particular, for road reconstruction. Usually funding is scarce. Only over recent years we see some progress in this direction, specifically that available funds on the local level after the decentralization process, and you can see active repairing of roads on different levels. Also, for next year, at least initially, it was planned some cuts on social outlays and specifically on housing subsidies and different other programs. So it's actually, at least it was in the initial plan. I don't know how it will end up at the parliament, but at least initially it was like an idea that we will be growing. And
what do you mean, like that there would be less money allocated to social help in general, to a house?
Yes, the idea was that people will be less dependent on subsidies. So when incomes are growing, less people are eligible for this program. So that was the basic idea. In general, it's also there will be increase on defense programs, but in general the budget will remain more or less about the same parameters as we have for the current year.
We talked about the defense budget. There's also the defense budget is enshrined, as I understand, to the law to a certain extent. But is it like, would you say this is an optimistic budget, so to say so?
In my opinion, they suggest quite optimistic approach for the revenue side. It doesn't mean that it's not realistic. In fact, we'll have at least 3% of GDP growth. Also, inflation is strong, and it's very unlikely it will ease that fast. Which means that revenues will be in good shape next year too. But there is a basic principle for budgeting that you need to be conservative. Meaning that if you believe in 3% growth, probably you should budget 2.5% growth, something like this. But this time, and in my opinion, it's kind of under impression of current success of this year, that Minfin feels quite optimistic about collections for 2018. And you know that this year budget was, we have huge revenues. We have, as of December 1st, we have more than 54 billion residuals at the treasury account. It's 1.9% of GDP, huge residuals of cash. And it's very encouraging for the authorities to see that huge collections.
So there is, as you said, some residual cash, but Ukraine is also really dependent on international funds. do they have an eye on this budget? And like first question would be, how much does Ukraine depend of these funds, and do the IMF or those kind of organism have an eye on budgets in Ukraine in general, on how it is?
I would say that we are almost total dependent on international donors, because firstly we have huge debts in foreign currency, and we have a very tight schedule of external redemptions for the next at least 5 years, and we will be able to survive next 2 years without substantial borrowings, but after that I think it will be I would say impossible. It was a very unexpected successful placement of 3 billion euro bonds in September. It was like, investors believed that we are about to receive next wire from the IMF. But as soon as we received those 3 billions, reforms effectively stalled. Nothing happens. There was pension reform which passed, but pension reform, it was, I would say, a very kind of popular thing, because it presumed immediate increase in pensions. But on other critical issues like gas prices leveling to import parity level and anti-corruption courts, they are just nothing changes. Yes, we are dependent on external funding, and it will be the case for at least next 5 years.
So we're talking about external fundings here. How does the current rate of the hryvnias influence the budget? Does it influence the budget?
It influences budget directly, because we have external payments. Hryvnia exchange rate is directly related to inflation, and usually if you have some procurements, some part of those procurements are dependent on, are allocated on imports, like some medicines, and usually if exchange rate changes, you will have to have a look on your spending plan. For next year, we have, this year exchange rate was much stronger than it was budgeted. Average exchange rate for this year was assumed 27.4 hryvnia per dollar. Currently, we have near 26.5 on average per year, so it was much better. For next year, we have the budget exchange rate 29 something per hryvnia per dollar, and I would say that it's quite conservative approach in this case. Because current tendencies, in particular on external markets, they promise for us good exports proceeds. Another side of the story is financial flow. Unfortunately, over the recent weeks we have, I would say, negative signals, which promise that we will have probably will have problem with IMF and other donors. Because all this anti-corruption issues.
Some loans, and they basically want proof that corruption can be tackled, and
anti-corruption issues became #1 for all donors. And if previously, anti-corruption court was among all points, I think now it will be the main requirement. Even more. It will become even stronger than this gas prices issue.
And now that's going to be my final question. What about the sales of assets? Does it influence budget too? Can you tell us about it?
It's a very good point. Everyone talks that we should start privatization, because privatization is good from all points of view, like inflow of investments, revenues for the budget, attracting investors who presumably would believe that Ukraine have started some progress, but so far, it goes very, very slowly. It was a new law on privatization, which was approved in first reading at the parliament. But it's not clear when it will be approved totally, because it allows, it gives some opportunities like independent evaluators, which was a problem for previously. For this year, it was planned 17 billion of collections from privatization, but already for a few years in a row we do not meet this target, and I'm not sure it will happen next year. Again, we have elections very soon, and privatization during the period of elections is it's not very popular issue, and you cannot improve your rating, and very likely it will not happen.
Okay, thank you very much for this interview. It was a pleasure to have you in the studio. We discussed the issue of budget with Dmytro Boyarchyk, the Executive Director of Case Ukraine. Thank you for watching UATV. Stay tuned for the rest of the program.